Hi, this is Molly.
And Cody.
The host of Over the Fence True Crime Podcast.
Please join us as we talk about true crime in the most normal place in the world.
Over the fence.
To be specific, over our backyard fence. We're both moms of humans and of dogs. We live directly next door to each other and share many conversations about life and family, but mostly true crime over our backyard fence.
And we invite you to come learn more about true crime and, well, us. We give a lot of attention to California true crime, but have ventured throughout the U.S. and even across the pond and plan to continue our world domination in the near future.
Listen to us wherever you listen to your podcasts, or give us a follow on Instagram at overthefence_podcast. So grab a drink and talk with us.
Over the Fence.
Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Yong Meadows was terrified. She had lost her 3-year-old daughter, Lucy, in a mall parking lot. She ran around calling her name and asking every person she came across if they had seen the little girl. But no one had, not even the security cameras. Lucy's case was treated as a stranger abduction, but with no physical evidence, the police had very little to go on. But as time went on and Young's story shifted and new witnesses came forward, people stopped asking what happened to Lucy Meadows and started asking what really happened to Lucy Meadows. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell the stories of those who never came home. I want to tell you the story of Lucy Meadows. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. Welcome.
Thank you for joining us once again. This is part 2 of the Lucy Meadows case. This one took a while for me to get through because there were just so many newspaper articles and court documents and people who changed their names and were hard to look up online. And it just took a while. But I was actually fortunate enough to speak to Lucy's half-sister, Amy, and she was able to give me a little bit of insight into her family's life.
Yeah, I want to hear this. I'm super, super excited to hear what she had to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're obviously going to talk about that this week, but last week we covered the beginning of the case. So if you haven't listened to that, definitely go back and do that before you start this episode. When we left off last week, the bodies of Jackie Beard and Morgan Violi, the other little girls who had gone missing in July of 1996 nearby, had been found. But there was still no physical evidence that would indicate whether little Lucy Meadows was alive or dead. Multiple sightings of her had been reported, and the farm and nearby bodies of water had been searched, but nothing got investigators any closer to getting answers. And so that's where we're going to be starting today. That search that I mentioned at the end of the last episode, the one of Red River, took place in March of 1997. By April, the Meadows divorce proceedings were still dragging on and becoming more and more bitter, with both of them basically shit-talking each other in their testimony. Tommy was claiming that Young wouldn't let him have a court-ordered visit with Danny. So, we talked a lot about this in the last episode, how Tommy said that Yong was keeping the children from him even before Lucy's disappearance. This particular incident happened the weekend before this hearing. He had a weekend visit scheduled with Danny, and he said that Yong just wouldn't let him do it. He testified that Yong said to him, quote, "I am concerned about my children," end quote. He then told her, quote, "If you're so concerned, where's Lucy?" End quote.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
Now, and this is all coming from Tommy's testimony, So according to him, Yong then told him, quote, "Lucy's okay. Lucy will be back," end quote. And then she went into the house. Yeah. So Tommy's like, wait, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. What the fuck does that mean?
Right. Well, according to Yong's attorney, he said that Yong was just expressing like her general belief that Lucy would be back, like not saying that she knew where Lucy was or anything like that.
I don't believe it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think something like that could kind of be chalked up to like language barriers and, you know, again, like he said, like the general belief, like Lucy's okay. I want to believe she's okay.
Look, ordinarily I try and give the parents the benefit of the doubt here, but there's just so much shit here. You know, I said it several times before Lucy went missing. It sounded as though Yong had had a psychotic break.
Yeah, I have no idea what happened, but
no, I don't know either. But right. I mean, like for her behavior to change so dramatically, so quickly.
Yes,
like,
it seemed very drastic.
Yeah, it's not something that you can chalk up to being pulled into some sort of cult or something like that.
Right.
It's something happened where her personality completely shifted, and it was felt in her own family, her mother and her sisters. Mm-hmm. And then
her daughter, her oldest daughter.
And her daughter, yeah. And then, of course, it obviously spilled into her marriage. And, there's just so much there that I have a real hard time believing anything coming from her side.
Yeah. And I feel like, not to give anything away, that feeling might grow for you. So, later that month, however, police thought that they might have solved the case. They thought that they knew where Lucy was. An anonymous tip came in that led investigators to a farm on Route 79 North. They again brought in cadaver dogs, different cadaver dogs than, the last time. And this was 2 instead of 1. And these dogs alerted on a spot on the banks of Spring Creek. And apparently right by this spot where the dogs alerted, they had also found like a pair of sunglasses.
Oh.
So police are like, oh shit, like something's happening here. So they called in divers, and divers came in and searched, but again, were unable to find any traces of human remains. Throughout the entire investigation, police kept on saying that Yong wasn't a suspect in her daughter's disappearance, and they believed it was a stranger abduction.
And once again, I mean, I guess that's fine if they're saying that publicly, but right. I hope that that's not hindering the investigation, only thinking one way.
Yeah, and I actually, because a lot of times in these investigations, we can get a pretty good handle on that. I don't have a great handle on it, even after all the research that I did on this. I think, like, my gut feeling, having looked at so many of these cases, is that it was more something they were saying publicly than something that they actually believed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And I don't know, again, that is just like my gut feeling.
Yeah, sure. But you're the one doing the research into this. But I mean, we have seen cases where they are just like hands off.
Right.
In one direction or another. And like, that's part of the problem with missing persons cases and how they're investigated is they categorize missing persons cases as runaways or stranger abduction or somebody in the family did it. And, you don't know, you can't rule out any of the other possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's why missing persons investigations should be handled the same way, regardless of the circumstances of how they went missing.
Yeah, agreed. And so I do think in this case, it was more just what they were saying publicly.
Okay.
And to the point of like, were they looking at, other possibilities other than a stranger abduction? By the 1 year mark, they definitely were, because 1 year to the day after Lucy was reported missing, they announced that a new witness had come forward to put everything into doubt. So remember, Lucy was reported missing at Rivergate Mall around 5:30 p.m. on July 25th, 1996. According to this witness, a few hours prior to this report, Yong was actually in the parking lot at the Governor's Square Mall in Clarksville when she approached a family and told them that she had lost her daughter.
Oh.
She told them that she had lost Lucy while she was getting crafts out of the car that she had been hoping to sell at the mall.
So the same story that she had told police, but at a different mall and several hours previous.
Correct.
Huh.
The witness who asked not to be named was a mother who was there with her family. And so she, of course, wanted to help Yong find her daughter. And so they searched the rows of cars in the parking lot frantically until the witness's son told his mom to stop. He told her that Yong was, quote, crazy and that she never had a child with her in the parking lot.
Huh. Well, how old is this witness's son?
I don't know. They never said.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But whatever happened, whatever he said, however old he was, it was enough that the lady, did stop. But it bothered her, because, you don't want to not believe somebody and then find out, that it was real, and then you just have to deal with that guilt for the rest of your life.
Sure, yeah.
So she actually called Clarksville police later that day to see if there had been a little girl reported missing from the mall. They said no, but they said, oh, a child had been reported missing from the Rivergate Mall, but apparently no one made the connection that it was Lucy in both cases.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Do we know how far apart those malls are?
Yeah, I actually checked. So they're a little under an hour away from each other, give or take. Rivergate Mall is actually pretty close to Nashville.
Okay. So here we have this witness that comes forward and says that basically the same thing happened at a mall an hour or so away from where the initial report was.
Yeah, but what I find interesting about that is that the mall that this witness was at was in Clarksville, where Yong lived.
Right.
So it would make sense that that would be the mall she would go to, not a mall that's an hour away. But if your plan doesn't work at your local mall, then you go to plan B.
Right.
Now, the witness said that she had been working midnight shifts and had missed the media coverage about Lucy somehow. After that day when she called the police, they didn't make the connection. And then she didn't hear all this other stuff about Lucy. So she basically continued to not make the connection. So it sounds a little weird to me, but I'm imagining that around this time, it's almost the 1 year anniversary. So she apparently came forward a week or so before the 1 year anniversary. And typically when you have missing people, you start to get renewed media interest around the anniversaries.
Yeah.
So maybe there were news reports that she had seen and she's like, wait a second, this sounds exactly what
happened to me, but it was the wrong mall.
Right. And, so to bolster this, because also, honestly, but somebody coming forward a year later and be like, oh, I hadn't heard about it. Because this case got a lot of publicity. We cover some where it's yeah, I'm sure you didn't hear about it because nobody talked about it. But Lucy's case was not that. So, on its face, I'm okay, is this just a crackpot who's trying to get attention, trying to insert themselves into the investigation, whatever. But Goodlettsville Police Lieutenant Harry Bell, and Goodlettsville is where Rivergate Mall is, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I was going to be like,
Yeah.
what is Goodlettsville?
Yeah, Goodlettsville is where the mall was, where she went missing. And again, it's an hour away from Clarksville. So that was part of the whole problem, too, because different counties, different jurisdictions.
Right.
So where Lucy lived, and I think that goes into like why the
Why
farm
they didn't
wasn't.
search the farm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get one jurisdiction that's investigating it because it's a missing person in their county, but they may not get cooperation, or they may not even think to ask the jurisdiction of residents
where they lived. Yeah.
to help with the investigation.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that all of that had to do with, why the farm wasn't searched initially. So anyway, Goodlettsville Police Lieutenant Harry Bell said that the witness's account of what Yong told her not only matched the accounts of the witnesses from Rivergate Mall, so like the initial witnesses that they interviewed, but her account also included details that had been withheld from the public.
Oh.
Then the witness agreed to take a polygraph, which she passed.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So again, I go back to my theory that Young had a psychotic break. I mean, here you have a mother that's basically shopping around for a venue.
Yeah.
To create the story on why her daughter's missing.
Yeah. So after this witness came forward and after they vetted her, Goodlettsville police brought Yong in for questioning, but she refused to utter a single word during the entire 45 minutes that they had her.
Which is her right.
Exactly. You do have the right to remain silent. And I do believe like her lawyer also was not with her.
Yeah. Okay.
So, they obviously got literally nothing from her. And so Lieutenant Bell was telling reporters that while this witness coming forward was a huge break in a case that really needed a huge break, they didn't have enough evidence to actually charge Yong with anything other than perhaps filing a false police report. But they were like, I don't even know if that's worth it,
Yeah. I mean, you don't even know whether that is actually true.
Right. And so
filing a police report.
Right. And if their goal at this point is to find more evidence that Yong, did make the story up and possibly did something to Lucy, you don't want to just file little
bullshit
nonsense
charges that are not going to go anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what it does do is it certainly continues to paint her in the negative light.
Yeah, absolutely. So by this point, it's looking more and more like Yong was somehow involved in Lucy's disappearance and that nothing maybe happened at Rivergate Mall at all. But what did happen to Lucy then? Was she alive? Was she dead? Yong's oldest daughter, Amy, believed that Lucy was alive and well. And this is when she kind of comes back into the story a little bit. After being picked up by police related to a shoplifting charge, she spoke to them. And this happened a few months before this witness came forward. She told police that Lucy was being kept in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, until her mother could pay off gambling debts. Now, keep in mind, before Amy said any of this, sightings had been reported in Hopkinsville, in the Korean community there. So that part of it's coming from a very, real place. And because of this, and because it's a family member saying this, police took it very seriously. So Amy's not even in Tennessee at this point, but the investigators who are working on Lucy's case took her seriously enough that they traveled up to go interview her. And so again, she told them her story and whatever, but she wasn't able to provide them with any names or any evidence of this being the case.
So Amy's story is that Lucy is being held by somebody for gambling debt.
Yeah.
This would be the first time that we're hearing anything about her mom potentially having gambling issues.
Correct. So investigators were like, listen, we don't know what's happening, but we have like nothing. Because this is before that witness came forward. They're like, we have literally nothing to go on. We need to take everything seriously.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
So they
Investigate it.
They did. They're like, maybe this is a case of, a daughter who's estranged from her mother who has bad feelings and is just saying things.
Yeah.
But like, regardless, we need to do this. So they did. They talked to her. They went to Hopkinsville. They interviewed people in the Korean community and just still couldn't find any evidence that Lucy was there, had ever been there, anything. So, they just kind of died off. There was just nothing that they could do. Police questioned Yong as well. And Lieutenant Bell told reporters that Yong told them that, quote, she had no knowledge of anything like that. She says she didn't know how to gamble and that she didn't owe any money, end quote.
This is going way back to the beginning of the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
When she was going through the first divorce,
mm-hmm.
didn't you mention that she was taking the kids up to Illinois to the parents' house so that she could deal with some quote unquote financial issues?
Yes.
Just something to keep in mind.
It is. And, that's a good point. And also her finances continue to come up in this. So it is a good thing to think about. And like I mentioned, I actually spoke to Amy. And she...
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, come on. I fucking wanted to get to this, so let's go.
So I spoke to her, and she didn't say anything about this specific accusation that she made about the gambling debts or whatever.
Okay.
But she does still absolutely believe that Lucy is out there, that she's alive. And that
she's almost 30 years old now.
Yeah. And that she thinks that, her mother was involved in her disappearance. And, she does not know exactly what happened. She doesn't, but she had heard things over the years about what she said to me, the black market.
So, following the money, what was Yong's financial status after Lucy went missing?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one that I will talk about in great detail.
All right.
But before we get to that, I want to kind of back up and talk about why I ended up reaching out to Amy in the first place.
Yeah.
Because, for those of you who listen to our show, that I have definitely talked to friends and family members of some of the people in our cases, but not always. We're not journalists. We're not investigators. I don't want anybody to think that I am, because I'm not.
And we're not solving cases.
No, and I don't want to misconstrue what I am, what this is, or any of it. But I wanted to know kind of what happened to everybody, because there are just so many different players in this, and it was so long ago. I was just really curious about what happened to everybody.
Right. And this is also, unlike some of our other cases, this is clearly a well-publicized story.
Exactly.
So there might be some misinformation out there. There might be whatever, but there's a whole lot of information that's out there, which is not typical of the stories that we report on.
Yeah, often it's not. But the thing is that that witness coming forward in 1997 was basically the last major reporting on this case for almost a decade.
Really?
Yeah. Huh. And, a lot of things can happen. So I'm like, well, what happened to everybody after 1997? It seemed to just have gone nowhere for a very long time after that. And part of the reason that Amy agreed to speak with me is because she does think that Lucy is out there and can be found. And while that may be unlikely, the police were never able to find any physical evidence that Lucy had been murdered. So in my mind, like, yeah, maybe she is. I have no idea.
Yeah, and she went missing at 3.
At 3. And so she's too young. Like, she wouldn't remember who she was.
Right. So it's highly probable that if she was sold, let's say, and a new family picked her up, that she would have no memory of her previous life, or maybe vague off memories or whatever.
Right.
But I mean, look, hey, my oldest does not remember when I was married to his mother.
Yeah.
Because we got divorced when he was 3.
Yeah.
He has no recollection of us living at that house. He has a mild recollection of the first apartment I was at when he was 3 / going on 4.
Right.
But that's it. So, like, I get it.
Yeah.
That could very easily be passed off as, hey, this is Aunt Jenny or whatever, and then it just turns into, oh, well, that's mom.
It's definitely within the realm of possibility because of her young age. So again, this witness comes forward in 1997 and nothing ended up happening legally after this. So they didn't charge Yong with filing a false police report or anything like that. And the reporting died down on Lucy's case. Yong and Tommy's divorce was finally finalized soon, after the summer of 1997, but he appealed part of that decision in 1998. So I wasn't able to find any of the court documents for the original divorce proceedings. So all the information I have on that is from newspaper articles, but I did find the actual decision on his appeal. And it was very, very interesting. While Tommy and Yong were separated, I said earlier that his entire university paycheck was being deposited into the joint account that she had the checkbook for. So I'm assuming that during that time, he was living off of the money that he was making from his real estate investment business.
Right.
Because
that's where he was sleeping.
Right. And during all of this time, he was able to buy that condo.
Right.
So he had to have money coming from somewhere, But Yong claimed in the original divorce case that she was selling her crafts because he had stopped cash payments to her in April of 1996.
Okay.
Though he was still paying for the mortgage and utilities. So again, I don't think that has ever been contested.
That she had a free house to stay on?
Yeah. And that the bills were paid. But she said he was giving her $500 a month and then he stopped in April. And so she had to sell her crafts in order to have money for, just for other parts of living.
Sure.
And so what I couldn't find out and what was not in this document, because, this whole argument was part of their original divorce proceedings. I think that Tommy actually may have stopped giving her the $500 a month because he, around that time, gave her a check for $23,000. And he had gotten this money from a property sale. So this $23,000 check comes up later, but I think that maybe he did stop giving her the $500 a month because instead he just gave her this check. Now, I'm talking about all this divorce stuff because I do think it's relevant to know, one, what became of the farm, and two, what Yong's financial situation was like in the months leading up to her daughter's disappearance and in the months after, which you already brought up, right? So Tommy did not fare well in the divorce. Amy told me that he loved that farm. It was a 102-acre cattle farm. And he wanted to live in it. The judge said no. The judge, thought that they should split the proceeds, but couldn't figure out a way for them to do that without selling it. So the judge ordered that it was sold.
Ordered it was sold?
Yeah.
So a judge forced them to sell the property?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know that could happen.
Yeah. So the judge ordered them to split all of the marital assets, including the farm, and they couldn't figure out a way to do that without selling it. So they had to sell it. So he literally had to sell all of his cattle. He had to sell the farm. And Amy said that Tommy was devastated. He loved that place. And so he had to sell it and basically just start over, So he sold it. They split the proceeds. And because Yong didn't really have any career prospects, he was ordered to pay her permanent alimony.
Permanent alimony?
Yes.
The fuck does that mean?
Well, I actually will get into that because that is part of the appeal. So all of this is the original divorce proceeding. So Yong was also granted custody of both children. Tommy was ordered to pay child support for Danny with the understanding that he would also pay support for Lucy were she to come home. He was ordered to pay $750.75 per month in child support for Danny, which was 21% of his net monthly income. And that was just the standard that Tennessee had at the time. That was their formula, basically.
Sure.
The net proceeds from the farm was around $160,000. So Yong and Tommy each got about $80,000 from that. The court also awarded Yong 25% of Tommy's retirement account. So at the point of his retirement, when he was able to access those funds, he was to give her, I believe it was 25% of what he had in there at that point.
Well, yeah.
So it was $56,000 or something that he had in there at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So she would have gotten 25% of that.
Right.
He was also ordered to pay off all of their debts and to pay her $1,000 per month in spousal support. So this is where the appeal comes in. You asked about what is permanent alimony? Tommy also wanted to know that because apparently the actual documentation was not specific.
Typically, oh boy. When it comes to alimony, you stop paying if they remarry.
Exactly.
So the statement of permanent alimony is why I was what the fuck does that mean? Because what the hell?
Well, right. And that was Tommy's point. He's wait, what? Excuse me.
Yeah, permanent alimony?
Yeah. And so that was actually one of the things he brought up in the appeal. So he was okay, but wait, not forever, right?
Yeah.
And so they're oh, no. You don't pay forever. It's until, he said, if the recipient, meaning Yong, gets married or dies, you don't have to pay. And he's okay, that's what I thought. But literally it doesn't say that.
Yeah, why would you?
Can we please spell that out?
Yes, yeah. Why would you put permanent, that?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Right.
And
so,
I'm sorry, I know that seems silly and stupid to be bickering about it, but you're talking about legal documentation and somebody's money. So you gotta be specific, and you can't just be I'm just gonna put this word permanent in it.
Right. And then be oh, no,
that's not what we meant.
We know that. No. And so that was exactly his point with the appeal. And so they did, in the appeal, they amended the language to specifically say
alimony until said recipient is either remarried or dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty standard language.
Exactly. So they did amend that. That was an easy fix, In addition to that, he had another bigger sticking point, which was the debts.
Yeah, that was interesting to me as well.
Yeah, because
he had to pay their debts.
Well, and that's the thing. And it's okay, you get it on the surface because, again, he was the breadwinner. And so, she didn't really have career prospects. So yes, on the face, it doesn't make sense for him to leave her with the debts because how is she going to pay it?
But it doesn't mean that he incurred the debts.
And that's exactly his point. He didn't have any problem paying off whatever, I don't know what debts they might have had during
credit
their marriage.
cards,
Yeah,
car payments, whatever.
Yeah, so whatever they did have during their marriage, like he was fine with that. He didn't care. His point is that according to him, Yong had squandered $36,000 after they had separated. Because remember, they were separated for a year before any of this started. Again, she had access to his entire university paycheck throughout their separation, but during this period, she still ran up about $16,000 worth of credit card debt between August of 1995 and April of 2017.
Which he has documentation of that occurred during their separation, so he should not be responsible for that.
That was his argument, yes.
Because he was still paying her money, so that in theory, that money could have been being used for the kids as well. So that's not child support issues, that's something totally separate. No,
his argument was that he was paying her his entire freaking paycheck. Yeah. And so she should have had enough money to cover all of their expenses and should not have been incurring large amounts of additional debt during that period.
Right.
You know, we're not talking about like $1,000 here and there, whatever, like $16,000. Then, in addition to that, there was that $23,000 check that he gave her that I mentioned before. Now, interestingly, that property sale that he made that money from was for a property that he had owned before he had met her.
So he just gifted her that money?
Yes. That was not marital property. It was not a marital asset. It had nothing to do with her. So Tommy had actually been married once before Yong, and I didn't mention that earlier. They didn't have children. He had lived down in South Carolina and was married to like some woman down there and was going to take this job at Austin Peay University, which was like a better job. And I guess she didn't want to come with him. They ended up getting divorced and he ended up moving up to Tennessee. So regardless, like...
Starter marriage, I'm familiar.
You know a thing or two about a thing or two. So anyway, so they were divorced. They didn't have kids, whatever. But sometime during all of that, he bought some property somewhere and sold it, made $23,000 and just signed that check over to Yong. So, you know, they're having these like hearings and depositions and everything. And
also, one thing important to note, a lot of people get confused about marital property, marital assets. And believe it or not, when you get married, it's not really all of your property, all of your assets, all of everything is everybody's in the mix. That is not the case at all. If you can prove that in this particular case, a property or some large amount of money existed previous to marriage, said spouse has no
claim to it
at all. Right.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so
that's there's some variation state by state, but that's pretty much across the board.
Yeah, that's a very general rule, basically. And so that's the thing. So she had no legal right to this $23,000,
but he gave it to her anyway.
Exactly. So, you know, during these hearings and everything, Yong was asked, like, what happened to all of that money? And she was like, I put a down payment on a car. They're like, okay. How much is that?
Yeah. It's $23,000. A down payment on a car?
Yeah, in 1996 or whatever. Like, that's a car.
Are you?
That's like a car and a half.
Yeah. Are you buying an RV?
Yeah, no. She had like a Ford Contour. I don't even know what that like.
Oh, I know exactly what a Ford Contour is. That's about a $12,000 car back then.
Yeah, exactly. So that was her car, and she put a $3,000 down payment on it. $3,000.
Yeah. So what happened to the other 20,000?
Yeah, well, that was their question. And so she was like, and she just kind of kept on throwing out random answers. She's like, I don't know. I bought some like clothes. And they're like, well, how much money did you spend? I don't know. Like some of it was expensive. Some I got on sale. Like she was just saying things like none of it made any sense. And then at the end of the day, she's just like, I don't know. I spent it.
Okay. Well, you spent $23,000.
Yeah. Plus $16,000 on your credit card. So the $3,000 was accounted for and was legitimate. Like it was for the down payment on a car. And like
which she could have very easily paid cash for.
Yeah, she could have. And so that was the thing. So in the original divorce, she got the car and that was like the one debt that Tommy didn't have to pay for. Like the judge ordered her to like make those car payments. But she got the car and whatever. So she had used the $3,000 of the $23,000 for the down payment, but couldn't actually account for any of the other money.
But it was $3,000 for a Ford Contour.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, like brand new back then. Because, okay, do you remember the Ford Taurus with with the?
I had one.
Yeah, with
we called it the old man space bubble.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the Contour was the compact version of that.
Oh, okay.
So it was the smaller version of the Taurus. It even had the same weird bubble lights, but it was they were smaller.
Yeah, I had a 97 or 98 Ford Taurus.
Yeah, so you're talking about a $12,000 car back then.
Yeah. That's why I think talking about all of this divorce stuff is important because it just paints the picture of like what was going on.
Where was her money going?
Right.
Yeah.
And like her personality and like, you know, and all of it.
So maybe Amy was right. Maybe she did have a gambling problem.
Well, yeah. And so that's interesting. So Tommy, just to close out the whole appeal thing, Tommy was able to get the decision modified to one, you know, change the language about the alimony, and then also to be reimbursed for the $20,000 that she couldn't account for. And they ruled that he didn't have to pay the $16,000 in credit card debt.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Did he see any of that money?
I mean, probably not.
Probably not. Yeah.
I have no idea. There were never any like, again, this was just the court filing.
No, yeah, I get it. But it doesn't seem like she would just have that money readily available.
Right.
So chances are.
No, but at least he wasn't legally responsible for paying the $16,000 and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So again, but back to your point about the gambling, like, I don't know if that had anything to do with where any of this money went, but Yong clearly did have a spending habit because again, $16,000 of it was on credit cards. That is likely not gambling. And she did talk about like buying clothes and stuff like that.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
After the farm got split.
Yeah.
Where did she go and where did Tammy go?
Well, I'm going to get to that because that was my question too. I was very, very curious about that. So yeah, we're going to get to all that.
I'm also curious as to whether this gambling issue is actually Yong's or if it's Tammy's.
Yeah, I have no idea. And that is interesting too. So I think that at this point in this story, we have no idea if Yong has a gambling problem, if Tammy has a gambling problem, like if anybody has a gambling problem, but I think it's definitely a possibility that whatever happened to Lucy was possibly financially motivated.
The evidence points that way.
Yeah. To your question, and this is how I went down the entire rabbit hole where, you know, you asked me if I did anything fun while our youngest son was at his babysitter's on Friday. And I said, well, I actually went down this entire rabbit hole on this case I'm researching, and I didn't leave my desk for like 6 hours straight. This is why, because I started looking at property records. And what I found was that after the farm was sold, that land was eventually made into a subdivision. Now, I found this out completely accidentally because I was curious. And so I went to look up the property records because the address was listed on that appeal, the court document. So I had the actual address. So I just Googled it, just want to see like what was going on with it. But nothing came up. I was like, well, that's weird. And, when you Google things, especially if you Google an address, similar addresses will come up.
Right. It'll give you like a range of addresses on the same street.
So I didn't get any hits for that address, but I got hits for similar addresses. And so I clicked on one that was like one number over.
Mm-hmm.
So like would have been the neighbor or whatever. And I clicked on it and it was like a newer looking house. I was like, that's weird. So I looked at that and I saw that it had been built in 2008. So I went and I dug deeper into the property records for that subdivision. And I found all of the houses in that subdivision. And I looked at the GIS map and I looked at everything. And it was a subdivision that had basically been built around 2008. That was on the property that the farm once sat on.
Okay, but who did they sell the property to?
I have no idea because the county doesn't have that record online.
So when did they sell the property?
Like around 1997 when the original divorce happened.
Okay, so
they sold it to somebody, I don't know, but then by 2008,
right, but
it became a subdivision.
But it's not them
no.
that were benefiting from their farm turning into a neighborhood, essentially.
Nope, they made basically $160,000.
And that was it.
And that was it. And then somebody made a buttload of money.
A shit ton of money. Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So to me, this is significant not because of the money, but because it means that a large portion of that land was dug up.
Right.
And clearly nobody found anything.
Right.
So okay, does that 100% mean that Lucy isn't buried out there? No, it doesn't.
No, but you're talking about what was the acreage?
102.
102 acres.
Yeah.
That has now been split up into an entire neighborhood.
Yeah.
What it sounds like.
A very, a large neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because all the lots are like a quarter acre or something,
Yeah. So it stands to reason there's nothing out there.
Right. And again, you can't say that with 100% certainty.
No, because, what if she was buried slightly off property or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot less likely that she's out there than it would have been if the land would have remained a farm and would have been basically untouched for the last 26 years,
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that the witness who came forward in 1997 was the last major thing that happened in the case for almost a decade. So the next huge, crazy, insane break in this case happened in 2006. That year, another witness came forward. This witness, who is unnamed in newspaper accounts, was a young man when he came forward and was 12 at the time of Lucy's disappearance. He told police that the night before Lucy was reported missing, he saw her on the floor of the farmhouse wrapped in a blanket, and she was in medical distress. He said that he wasn't sure, but she could have been dead. He said that the adults in the home were panicked and were huddling around her and shouting her name. After he told this story to detectives, they also had him take a polygraph, which he passed.
The farmhouse?
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, so they said Lucy was home.
This is one of Tammy's kids?
Well, maybe not. So after this witness came forward, police contacted Yong, obviously, to ask her about this, but she declined to make a statement. They did, however, reach Tommy, who said that he hoped this would lead to a resolution. He said, quote, "I would like to see it resolved. It has been hanging over me for 10 years. This might give me some peace of mind," end quote. Now, with all of this happening, police wanted to convene a grand jury, but the DA ultimately decided that they didn't have enough evidence to do so.
I mean, yeah, there isn't.
Exactly. So again, the case basically died, like once again. So nobody really knew who this witness was, but most people did assume that it was actually Danny.
Oh.
But there was, like you said, also a possibility that it could have been one of Tammy's kids, because no public information has ever been given about Tammy's kids. I don't know their ages. I just know they were school aged. I don't know their genders. Like, I don't know. So I don't know if one of her kids would have been a 12-year-old boy at that time. Technically, Danny was 11 at this time, but
Yeah,
who knows? Like,
yeah, sure.
yeah. So I don't know. So I asked Amy, and she thinks it was Danny, but she's not entirely positive either. And the reason she's not entirely positive is because she says that they don't really talk about what happened because it's too difficult for Danny. She says that he was the protective older brother. I mean, they were 7 years apart. So he was like 11 when all of this happened, and he blames himself for not being able to stop whatever happened to his sister, which, of course, obviously, none of this is Danny's fault.
No, absolutely not.
He couldn't have done anything to stop what happened. And it's like, it breaks my heart that, he still carries that guilt with him. But I also understand why he does,
Yeah.
Because when you're a kid and something traumatic like that happens, like, you can't separate the feelings from the reason, and
Yeah, you absolutely take on the blame because and it's not even about the age thing. It's if you see somebody that you care about getting hurt,
yeah,
and you can't do anything about it, you blame yourself.
yeah. So like that, God, when she told me that, I was like, oh, that was awful. And honestly, that's why, because I found Danny too on social media, but like, I didn't want to reach out to him because I just felt like this was too much for him.
Yeah.
Amy at least was like a little bit removed from the situation.
Right.
But Danny was there for the whole thing. So where is everybody now? I was actually surprised to find that they're mostly still in the Clarksburg area. Amy said that she does not have a relationship with her mother at all. And it doesn't sound like she did, since before Lucy went missing, when Yong basically was like, "Don't call me anymore." Like, it seems like that truly was the end of their short-lived relationship. So she only hears things occasionally from Danny, who is still in touch with her, kind of. It does sound like he ended up being a lot closer with his dad, though. Yong did have custody of him, as we talked about. Like, she was granted custody of both the children in their original divorce case. But it sounds like when Danny was a little bit older, like, he started basically fighting that and decided that he wanted to go live with Tommy.
Right. And different states have different laws about age of decision making.
Right.
So like in Pennsylvania, it's 14.
It sounds like, just from what Amy told me, I think it's probably something similar in Tennessee, because it sounds like this all went on for just a couple of years.
Yeah, so 14, 15, somewhere around there.
Right. Because like this all happened when Danny was like 12.
Right.
That's when the divorce was finalized.
Yeah.
So I think it was like a back and forth for a couple of years, not for like too long. So I think it is probably 14, 15, like you said.
Yeah. And that's the age at which a child can decide which parent to live with, provided both have stable households. Of
Well,
course.
yeah, exactly. And so there was apparently a hearing around this.
Sure.
And
well, I'm sure because it was contested.
yes. And Amy said that she actually came down and was a witness at the hearing and talked about her mother's, quote, lack of interest in actually being a mom, end quote.
Well, good for her.
Yeah. So that helped basically
Yeah.
Danny just be able to go and live with Tommy. And so at some point, I don't know exactly when, Tommy ended up remarrying. And his new wife, Song Cha, who was also Korean and went by the name Christine, was, quote, more of a mom to Danny than anyone else, and she's still there for him now, end quote. Sadly, Tommy passed away in 2010 at the age of 70. Amy says that he never gave up trying to find Lucy, but and this really killed me when I found it because I found Tommy's obituary online and it says that he is survived by one child, Danny. So with all this, I was curious about what happened to Yong, which is part of why I reached out to Amy in the first place. Like I said, she doesn't have contact with her, so she wasn't really sure. But as far as she knows, she's still in the Clarksville area, bouncing around like minimum wage jobs. She doesn't think that she ever remarried, but she's not positive.
And do we know anything about Tammy?
Well, yeah. So that's how this whole thing started, because I was trying to figure out what happened to Yong and Tammy after the farm was sold. So while I never came across any property in Yong's name, one of the addresses associated with Yong is actually in Tammy Dai's name. Dai's Korean name is Hyung Sim Jang, and I was able to find a home in Clarksville that was purchased by her after the farm was sold. And again, what I was able to find online did also list that as an address associated with Yong. And from what Amy told me, they did continue to live together.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is interesting to me that the house was in Tammy's name, though. So I don't know if Tammy had a job during any of this, what she was doing, because remember, that one incident where Lucy was found wandering on the road, Yong was apparently working and Tammy was supposed to be babysitting.
Right.
So I don't know if she had any money. So I'm very curious as to how she would have been able to buy a home. And Yong, from what I could find, never had any property in her name. So it makes me wonder if Yong ended up giving Tammy money from the divorce settlement. And if she did, why? I mean, that's a whole other host of questions. Based on an entry that I found on Ancestry.com, it does appear that Tammy remarried at some point after all of this happened to a man named Thomas Graham. He is apparently deceased, though I couldn't find a year for that. But if this is the same person, Tammy herself passed away in 2009. To my knowledge, Tammy's younger children, who are adults now and lived in the farmhouse, were never able to be interviewed by police regarding Lucy's disappearance.
She said Tammy's kids were never interviewed.
Right.
I'm at a loss as to why they weren't interviewed. And if it comes down to the police saying that they didn't have any real reason to interview them, that's false.
Well, they didn't have parental consent either.
Yes. However, once again, if they had involved social services, though they are not law enforcement, are mandated if there is reason to believe that there is abuse or neglect happening in a house, i.e., if the cops are called to this house and they believe that something is happening in the house and they are mandated reporters and report it to CYS or social services, a case gets started. The social worker is mandated by law that they have to interview everybody in the house that has contact with those children. And that gives the cops the justification to get into the house and basically force an interview not with the cops, but with the social workers. That's an end around, but that's the way the law is written. So they could have, if those cops had known, if anybody had known this, which they probably didn't back then, because I feel like most cops don't know that now, that is a way to get somebody to interview the kids in a house where there might be something going on.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that does not seem to have happened in this case. Again, it doesn't seem like CYS, social services, whoever, were ever involved in any aspect of this at any point, even during like the very contentious divorce proceedings, even after Lucy disappeared, at no point. Lieutenant Bell worked on Lucy's case until his retirement in 2011. Police say that they still occasionally receive tips, with the last one coming in 2016. Tommy died never knowing what happened to his daughter, and her older brother still lives with this trauma. Lucy didn't just vanish, though. Someone made her vanish. But with so much time having passed and no physical evidence, finding any sort of closure really just comes down to someone out there saying what they know. Because someone does know something. Lucy Meadows has been missing from Goodlettsville, Tennessee since July 25th, 1996. At the time of her disappearance, she was 2'8" and around 30 pounds. She is a biracial Asian Caucasian female with straight brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a button-down blue denim dress with white socks and white canvas shoes. Lucy was 3 years old when she went missing. She would be 29 today. Anyone with information on Lucy Meadows' disappearance is asked to call the Goodlettsville Police Department at 615-859-3405. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, And Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. Our research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!